Thank you, Isabel, for this kind introduction. So, since we're already a bit late, I'll just get into media res. Here you see my first cooperation with the poetic powers of artificial intelligence, because I thought that my theme is ideally fit to sort of be validated by what we see here at the expo. So I thought, well, let's walk over to the British Pavilion and try out this hyped AI program, which is an artificial poet. Now, I spare you the constraints that you have to meet in order to be able to make an input. But then you give a no longer than 14 letters word. You feed it into the machine, and my word was small wonder, power. Actually, I wanted self-realization, but that was more than 14 letters, so I couldn't. But then power did work, and that's what came out. The power is good. I'll do my very best, and as my days pass slowly and contentedly, it's a fragment, so it's kind of romantic, isn't it? So, actually, I'm not only using this as an introduction to a delightful introduction, but it has a point, namely, there are all sorts of power. Here, poetic power, kind of disciplined imagination, put in words in this case. And it also shows, very painfully, that power, whatever its form, is limited. It's not unlimited. This is a very limited form of power. Now, with regard, I mean, this is somewhat positively, affectively charged, but now let's invert my title. If I had announced a talk about AI and the transfiguration of powerlessness, subjugation, and loss of control, you would have immediately caught the air of lugubriosity and ambivalence, and also importance of power, domination, and control, because after all, who would want to be powerless, subjugated, and suffering from loss of control? So this brings out another point about power, namely, not only that it's important, but that it's ambivalent under certain contexts or depending on circumstances and who is the power wielder and who is the object of power. A lot of power could be a very good thing, but a lot of power could also be a very bad thing, and little power could be a good thing, and little power could be a bad thing. So you have four possibilities here. Actually, that a lot of power could be a good thing is a very simple clause on a late Foucaultian insight, namely that power is not only restraining or keeping down or repressive, but it's productive. And that is sometimes a very good thing. And nothing could be produced without power. That's simple. Now, I don't want to go into the imagination of the experience, what it is like to be powerless and perhaps utterly powerless. But it's a very interesting meditation, because then you realize you realize what is good about power, why you want to have certain forms of power, and why we're after power. Now compare John Dewey's, I think was written in the 20s, a very interesting diagnosis of important trends or interests in philosophy of modern times, starting from Descartes, in his book The Quest for Certainty. Now, I would say this quest for certainty is only the other side of another quest that is equally or maybe even more characteristic of us moderns, namely it's the quest for sovereignty, not only for certainty. Sovereignty would be a position of full power that doesn't even have to answer to another power. So sovereignty would be the paragon of safe control. So it would be a good place to be in sovereignty. Now, okay, having got this far, let me briefly say, after Isabel's introduction, a few words why I'm occupying myself with digital phenomena at all, because now that you heard Habermas, Apple, and I could add Hegel, which was my dissertation long ago, how on earth would I develop an interest philosophically in things digital? Now, briefly, it's that 5 years ago we organized a number of conferences on the digital as culture, Digitalisierung als Kulturprozess, which was new at the time because it was when digitalization was mainly treated as a technical topic, technical progress, but we emphasized the cultural nature of all this. And from this, I developed a, by now, long-standing interest in everything that has to do with our contemporary landscape or dynamics or processes of digital, of the development of the digital. And 2 years ago, 2020, we didn't have to postpone it, we really started it in 2020. I organized a research group. Armin Grunwald's also part of this research group. It's called Philosophical Research into Digital Phenomena, Philosophische Digitalisierungsforschung. So we ran a number of conferences that dealt with that in a provocatively monodisciplinary way, namely philosophy-wise, dealt with communication arrangements, with responsibility arrangements, and with knowledge and rationality arrangements under the impact of the digital transformation. And then I discovered that even though we went through extremely interesting things, we had forgotten something, namely power, which is probably a déformation professionnelle. Philosophers, if they do it at all, they realize very late usually that it's not only rationality, but there's power also. And actually my position on this, which I won't expound here, is that what we call the rational is a special form of power, with very interesting qualities, but it's not the antagonist or the non-power, it's a very special kind of qualified power. Okay, so now you can situate perhaps better what I'm talking about, why I'm talking about, what I'm talking about, digitalization as a cultural process. Now from this vantage point, it makes sense to me, and I hope to you too, to think of a conjunction or a nexus between digitalization, algorithms, and artificial intelligence. So I wouldn't divide these up. They are moments or components or partial processes or aspects of one another, I would say. But they're only contingently related. That's the point I want to make. There could be, I'll later say why there could be algorithms without digitalization. There could be digitalization without algorithms. There could even be artificial intelligence without digital computers. There could be biologically realized and so on. But now in our epoch, we have a contingent combination, a very strong combination, a synergetic combination of digitalization, algorithms, and AI. So when I say AI, from now on, this is going to mean algorithms and artificial intelligence. Now, just to, this is very simple digital humanities. Now, the next two slides, it's simply a corpus, a large corpus and an analysis of the frequency with which the word algorithm crops up in all relevant newspapers in the German language from 1946 to 2017, and you see it rises heavily, and to a substantial point, to illustrate the point I was making, that visualization algorithms and AI are rising together. Here is another such curve. This is the frequency of AI. It even outruns algorithm by 2 times. Okay, so this was the word count. It's just illustration. I mean, I'm not making much fuss about this. But maybe if you are not convinced that technology such as computer gear and technology in the scientific sense, or in the ideal sense of programs being written, scientific knowledge and all that, and culture go together, or should be thematized together. I think of Bruno Latour's dictum, which I found quite insightful, quote, "Technology is society made durable." Yeah, so technology is part of society, part of culture. It's society made durable, which is an interesting parallel to how we think about institutions, because that's also practices made durable. So now I'm going to talk about cultural processes, 3 minutes perhaps, to give a bit more theory at this point, because after all, culture is up for grabs, and there are so many theories of culture. Over the years, since I was for 20 years working in the department of culture and philosophy, we developed a theory of cultural processes. I can't go into this, but there's a number of publications on this, and together with some colleagues from St. Gallen, Switzerland, we are working on an approach we call radical cultural business ethics. So it's conceiving of practices as cultural entities, and these are 5. Very briefly, I'll go to this. Come back at the end of my talk to this slide. That's why I have to say a few words about it. So in the middle, what is the smallest unit of analysis if you go with the cultural process approach? It's practices. Now, what are practices? Practices contain, so to speak, socialized persons. This is very important. No practices without socialized persons. As sense-making purposive agents, because practices makes more or less sense to us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be oriented. We wouldn't find our way around in practices. So purposive sense-making agents. Plus, and this is important, all equipment, I'm sort of shorthand, I mean all equipment and all other stuff, material or immaterial, that is relevant for their agency. So Personen und Inventar. Practices is not just about persons, it's about their agency situated in the world, so all the ingredients of the world, whatever they are necessary for their agency, are part of what we call practices. So if we change, for instance, from by doing calculation practices, if we change from slide rulers to electronic gear, this is a change, an aspect of the practice. The very slide rulers are part of the practice, and so are the calculators. Now, cultural processes have, as such, as distinct from, let's say, chemical processes or biotic processes, or electric processes or whatever, have 5 distinctive process qualities or properties that together make up their specificity as cultural. And let's start with the upper right. This is a very bad visualization because the arrows also should go the other way. But anyway, so normalization means that culture produces a sense of the normal. It's sort of work that works out in their being the self-evident, the obvious, and what is perceived as normal, right? Otherwise, we couldn't we couldn't realize deviations. There must be a normal. Then there's historicity, which is different from natural evolution, because in cultural processes there can be tradition and there can be a self-affectation. So comparing it to evolution, one would at least have to say it's Lamarckian, because processes can work on themselves, they can develop an idea of where to go and so on. And cultural practices are always patterned. They never come like pearls on a string, but they're always larger or maybe in huge pattern. Like, think of how many patterns are necessary to bring us in this room here now for the practice of a lecture being held. And practices are categorically group-based. That is, there couldn't be culture for one person. Robinson Crusoe notwithstanding, he was a representative of culture, all right? So there's always a we and the others, and this is the only innovation. You already see it by the strange word, but I thought if Derrida got away with difference, we should get away with normativity. So it's motivation and normativity in one, meaning that culture produces, well, I think Judith Butler would say docile bodies. I would say reason-responsive persons that are socialized agents. That is, their motivation is already sort of adapted to the culture that they've been socialized in, so that they make sense of their cultural ways and surroundings. And not only do they make sense, but it empowers them, because it's the motivation, not only lofty normativity. It's okay. So actually, I have to hesitate going deeper into this. I must say that this is really work in progress. But I have to stop here. It's just an illustration. The way I think about practices as cultural practices. So now, having said this much, we turn to power. I actually have to hurry up. Conceptualizing power in and out of scientific disciplines. Now, this is a bit of conceptual analysis now, and I hope it's not too boring, but after all, we have to get a clear idea of the concept and its variants when we speak of power. Not to do this is to do bad humanities, I would say. So there's a common sense core intuition, and this could be expressed, I'd say, in these words: this power's ability to produce effects or bring about results. Yeah, one could say power is ability to get things done. Yeah? Now, this is too easy. There are a number of complications. Now, think of volcanoes, or think of a thunderstorm. A thunderstorm also produces effects and brings about results, maybe disastrous results, but we wouldn't say that it really has power, only in a figurative sense. So what we really mean with power is a cultural phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon of nature, or actually I will look at what in physics is called power in the end, but you'll see the difference. So power, we should only predicate power of natural phenomena in a figurative sense, so we should be aware that it's figuratively. Elephants are powerful animals, yes, but in an anthropomorphic sense, they are powerful animals. But anyway, at least this core intuition captures the element of force or strength in power. But what is lacking is the agency of persons, as opposed to volcanoes or animals. And also, it is lacking an aspect of control that is part and parcel of our understanding of power. Because let's say, I know, this room, this is a terrible thought experiment, but I walk into a room, and unbeknownst to me, it's filled with explosible gas. I switch on the light, and I produce a terrible effect, and the whole thing blows up. So I did produce a very massive effect, but we wouldn't say that I had the power to blow up the room. It was out of my control. It just happened accidentally. This is not power. So there's an element of control that we have to add to the concept, and then also power as such is latently is a relational notion. That is, power is always in relation to other powers, be they countervailing powers or be they synergetic powers. It's always power amongst power, or relative to other power. Now, having said so much, of course, it's natural to turn to Max Weber, because he gave a really genial, easy, simple, crisp attempt to define power as, in the social world, in culture, as the chance in a social relationship that one can achieve one's will, even against the resistance of others, no matter in what this chance is grounded, whatever it's grounded in, right? So it could be in communication, it could be in persuasion, it could be in threats, it could be in commands, it could be in whatever, what have you. But it's, you see, it's, well, to put a label on it, it's a voluntaristic concept, because it's speaking of the will, yeah? Which isn't really wrong, but I mean, I think it's completely okay, but maybe we can go a bit further in the analysis. We get a richer concept. Also, Max Weber famously conceived of domination as a more specific manifestation of power. So it's domination is one of many ways to exercise power. And domination is the chance that given commands will produce compliance of members of a given group of persons. So it's about commanding force and compliance. Now, in social science and political theory, power is often equated simply with the capacity of an individual to influence the actions or the beliefs or the conduct or the behavior of other individuals. Sometimes the terms power and authority are used interchangeably. This is a mistake, I would claim, since authority is the name of a different concept, a concept referring to practices of justification. It's a normative concept to the bone. What would make sense to say, though, is that authority is power held to be legitimate by those who are in a position at all to take a normative stance towards power. So it's legitimate power one could call authority, but power need not be legitimate. That's the point. Yeah? We have to distinguish the structural analysis, which is, well, descriptive and explanatory, from an order of justification in which the question arises, is this or that power justified, more or less justified, and so on. So this is my own attempt to sort of take Max Weber a bit further. Power as counterfactually robust governance. That's actually the formula that I find most interesting at the moment. An agent's relative power is a function of their achieving governance of of forces, call them F plus, by means of other forces, call them F star, which they trust they control. So it's a relation between forces. It's doubly relative. It's relative to other powers, but it's intrinsically relative, a relation of forces, namely forces which I trust I can control. Like, for instance, my power of movement. And if I haven't drunk too much, my power of producing ideas in speaking, or speaking coherently and so on, is something that I usually trust I can control. And with forces that I at least trust I can control, I am able to enlist for my purposes and govern other forces that either haven't been in my control, or I can amplify forces that are already in my control so that they change their character. That's why I speak of two forces analytically, right? Call them F plus and F star, doesn't matter. Now, this is, I think, interesting. I find an analysis which also carries some explanatory weight or makes us see things with regard to things digital, because chiefly thinking along these lines, we see clearly that there are three principal ways for things to go wrong. Namely, there could be the trust in control could be spurious, like here, the driver obviously didn't have the control. This was the Elch test that he supposed him or herself to have. Then governance could be insufficiently achieved. Now here's an example of political governance being insufficiently achieved. This is a right-wing demonstration of anti-corona demonstrators in Germany. And thirdly, governance is achieved, but unintended indirect consequences with bad effects also result. Now this is taken from a completely different cultural domain. I was struck by this announcement, which is run in Germany at the moment, about the dating service Parship. Lasst uns dating detoxen, yeah? So it's obviously become toxic. Now, Parship is really a prime example of very interesting and complicated patterns of finding mates, being transformed by digitalization and being morphed into different practices, and in a way they achieve their purposes much more efficient than before, but now it turns out that their efficiency is also their weakness. There are unwanted, unintended side effects, people getting, okay, I'm not going into this. I mean, read Eva Illutz on this. I mean, she's really good at analyzing the dark underside of these practices. Okay, I could go on with lots and lots of examples. Once you see that, I mean, this is all in this formula, right? I mean, trust in forces that you can control could go wrong. The governance could be insufficiently achieved, even though you control forces F star. Or governance could be completely achieved, but unintended consequences ensue that somehow subvert, ruin, corrode, or in other ways are detrimental to the practice that you that you have acquired the power to govern. Okay, so. Okay, now here's just to complete this little tour d'horizon about concepts of power. Of course, we shouldn't neglect physics because it's well established there. It's a basic concept. This thing runs with power. Power comes in forms of electricity. This is simply energy, but physics defines power as the ratio. Again, you see the relational element, the ratio of two quantities, namely the amount of energy spent per amount of time during which the energy is spent. Spending energy roughly means that work gets done. So the formula is power is a difference or even differential ratio to a difference in time or interval of time. It's the rate with respect to time during which work gets done. Now, obviously, this kind of power couldn't go wrong. This is power in the natural world, whereas power in the social world can go wrong. This is a categorical difference. But again, there's enough similarity, that's why I brought this in. There's enough similarity here on a conceptual level to realize that when we speak in the humanities, when we properly speak of power, we are not speaking about something altogether different and alien to how natural scientists speak about power. There are differences, but there are similarities too. Otherwise, it would be surprising. I mean, we would just have a double meaning. So now I want to, now I'm getting to AI, finally, and I want to compare power and control in normative governance, in a normative or in normative ways and in algorithmic ways. So this is dense, I'm just reading it. Normative programs, call them programs, sets of normative textures, one would also say. I mean, what gives shape to our practices? The normativity, right? So normative programs, from the most banal and weakest individually chosen for private purposes as a means, such as a cooking recipe, to the strongest officially authorized instructions for collective purposes, for instance, laws. Because of their grounding, because of the grounding of normative programs in speech acts, inherently they have the property that all the normative forces we bring into play through speech acts and all the effects that come into play through them can be comprehensively reflected by all persons. Persons can be addressees or authors or modifiers of the norms. They can interrogate the norms for their alleged good sense. They can bring out that what seems good sense is actually bad sense, and they can interrogate such claims. They can give and demand reasons. Now here's the Habermasian bit. They can give and demand reasons for the norms in terms of their alleged good sense. Reasons that justify or deprive of justification the normative forces of the norms in question. Let's call this property discursibility for short. Diskursivierbarkeit. I couldn't come up with a proper English term, so discursibility, right? So normative programs have the property of discursibility, whereas algorithmic programs that we run in machines and the machines that we run with these instructions do not inherently possess the property of discursibility. They can acquire this property only to the extent that we deliberately and purposefully construct the property into them. And that constructing it into them means into the total ensemble. The total ensemble of an algorithmically regulated practice consists in part of human actors, very different, in very different roles, like software developers, company founders, CEOs, retailers, and end users of devices, concerned citizens, mandated politicians, what have you. The total ensemble also includes non-human actors, and agents one should say, the total non-human actors and their machine agency, for instance, computers and other automata, small and large, smart and dumb technical systems. Making the total ensemble of technical algorithmic micro-institutions, I would say, discursive, making it discursive is a problem of its own rank, and no small one. It's about more than just explainable AI, much more. It raises important scientific but also political questions. How are which powers distributed? Who among us, whoever the us is, can and who should be empowered to demand, give, and evaluate relevant reasons for action as well as reasons for justification? For instance, I mean, a certain line of programs is, or calculating machines or appliances is developed. There are reasons behind this. What are the reasons? Who can put them into question, ask for justification? and who actually does fill out this "we" today? Now, these are sort of heuristic questions for an analysis of the state of discursibility of algorithmic programs. Yeah? Algorithmic programs, yes. So now, with these considerations, let's see, I have to hurry a bit. Actually, okay, one more commentary on the distinctions that I drew. I don't think that we can give these problems captured in these heuristic questions a technical fix. I don't think this is going to work. But many people, even smart people, do think they can give it a technical fix. For instance, in the program, the research program of explainable AI is just one step in this direction. It's giving it a technical fix. Even one of our distinguished speakers recommends solving the problem in a technical way. Now I have to find the slide. Where is it? Yeah, here it is. So we heard the talk by our colleague Bensmüller. So I was intrigued by the talk. I was doing a bit of looking at his papers, and here's one of them. Manifesto, even a research manifesto, Reasonable Machines called. Now I'll just look at the parts that I marked with red. Future intelligent autonomous systems are inevitably deciding on moral and legal questions. Again, here you have Sachzwang, the force of Sachzwang. Yeah? For instance, in self-driving cars and so on. As decision processes in most modern subsymbolic AIS are hidden, here you have black boxes, but why should they be hidden? The simple political plea for transparency, accountability, and governance falls short. Yeah, sure, the simple political plea does fall short. A sound ecosystem of trust requires ways for IAS to autonomously justify their actions, that is, to learn giving and taking reasons for decisions. Now, if anything is anthropomorphizing, this is anthropomorphizing. I mean, how should systems justify their actions, that is, to learn giving and taking reasons for the decisions? The last line, enabling machines to normative communication creates trust that opens new dimension of AI application and human machine enablement. This is wishful thinking. I mean, this is an image of the future, imagination of a future that will not arrive, I mean, as far as one can tell. So, this was just to underline that the difference between algorithmic regulation and normative regulation, they run deep and they can't be fixed easily, even though it might appear so. That is a false anticipation, I would say. Maybe ideologically even. So now for the last part of my talk, oh God, I want to consider a bit the nexus of power, knowledge, and responsibility. Which is required if you want to hold power accountable. Now, obviously, I would say algorithms themselves cannot be held accountable since they arguably have no intentions and lack the reflexive and evaluative element of agency. So I wouldn't hesitate to attribute agency to algorithms the way that you could attribute agency, for instance, to DNA, to use a biological example. But DNA as such is just a chemical. Algorithms as such are just lines of code, yeah, algorithm as code. But they develop agency if put in a suitable environment. DNA needs the entire organism, or at least a cell, to do what it it can do, and so do algorithms need suitable technical environments to develop the agency that we can attribute to them. It's when they run that they develop agency. Yeah? So this is what I would distinguish from power in AI as code. I would distinguish power in AI as performance. But okay, maybe let me just say a few more words on AI as code. Just think of what do I do when I produce an algorithm? Well, technically understood, I write code. I create a composition in a programming language. I say, for instance, I don't know, Python or so. I select elements from a finite set of determinate operations, mainly instructions and declarations. Let X be such and such, and if then, and create a composition that is sequentially actualizable, that is executable by a suitable machine, that should serve the purpose of reliably and repeatably reaching a determinate end, for instance, the sorting of words alphabetically, or solving a mathematical equation, or distinguishing a cat-like pattern from a dog-like pattern. Originally, the end is set by the composer, the program developer, but can subsequently, the end can be modified by interpreters of the composition and substantiators of the algorithmic code that's composition. In practice, you can modify this. Non-technically understood in natural language, we can express or frame algorithms in terms of directive speech acts, commands, instructions, and declarative speech acts, all with a view to some purpose achieved and result obtained. Now, again, compare this to a recipe. It's a set of instructions for making something, for instance, baking cake from various ingredients. Use 2 spoonfuls of sugar, flour, and milk, and so on. So what I'm here suggesting is that algorithmicity is something we don't only find in computerized form. This is a highly specialized form, but the algorithmic, if you will, you also find in very rigidly normatively controlled practices such as bureaucracies, strict bureaucracies. They have a surprising similarity to the inner workings of software running on a computer. There's a registry, there's all kinds of stuff, there are archives, and all that. So, and a sort of soft algorithmic practice is following a recipe. It's running a recipe on your kitchen gear. It's going through a very elaborate practice by being oriented by a program we call recipes. So this is all the difference on code, and when you run code, you have algorithms as performance. Now, do algorithms really do work? Well, as I said, not per se, but when placed in charge of a machine that we designed for them to run on, for instance, smartphone computer, with its software programs, and when it's actually running on the machine, algorithms certainly do something, they work. If to work means spend energy and moreover to perform or carry through a task requiring sustained effort or continuous repeated operations. Now, it would be seriously misleading if we were to construe cultural practices that depend on programs, either normative or algorithmic, as something merely algorithmic. Think about Google Maps, for example. It's not just mapping software running via computer. It also involves, and here again is the material and the equipment side of practices, it also involves geographical information systems, geolocation satellites, transponders, human-driven automobiles, roof-mounted panoramic optical recording systems, international recording and privacy law, physical and data networking, routing systems, and web mobile presentational apparatuses. I mean, all this is part of these cultural practices. So now, before I'll end my talk with power as ideology, it's the third distinction that I want to make, but before I come to this, let's stay for another 2 minutes with AI as performance. And here I want to suggest a morphing of Searle's Chinese room thought experiment to what I would call here, for polemical reasons, the China room. The Chinese room, we learned in various talks, is the thought experiments, a thought experiment answering the question, do syntactic machines really understand meaning, or can they process meaning, and giving it a negative answer. And the China room, I would carry these considerations over to the volitional, and I would answer, can machines, or artificially intelligent machines, machines made in their operations to display what we can interpret as intelligent behavior by suitable programs, can such machines really be powerful, that is, work in powerful ways? Do they have, in short, can they really will something, or can they have volition? So I'm not focusing on meaning, but on volition here. Yeah. What is artificial volition? What would that be? Now here in this ensemble, speaking again of an ensemble, what I wanted to illustrate very briefly, just signaling in a admittedly hand-waving way, is the following. Here is a Skinner box. This is a Skinner box with a pigeon in it. Now this pigeon is there could also be an AI program sitting inside. The pigeon is a placeholder for an AI program. It's sitting in a black box. It's ruling, it's dominating the operations of a machine, and has perfect control if everything goes smooth and it's not, the machine isn't hacked or the program distorted. So it reigns supreme, but only inside the box, right? Now, this is a well-trained pigeon. We have trained this pigeon. I mean, Skinner made pigeons do by positive and negative rewards. This is operant conditioning, and this is supposed to be the main principle, as we heard various times, of deep learning arrangements. It's structurally analog, isomorphic to, well, the psychology of days gone by, namely operant conditioning of the 30s and 40s. Nobody talks about this in psychological learning theory today. This is, by the way, I can't follow this remark, but what sounds like a flippant remark, I think has I find needs further investigation. I mean, I'm also a psychologist by training, and I'm really appalled by the absence of, by the ignorance of AI people when they speak of intelligence or when they speak of learning, the almost complete absence of the knowledge of psychology. They just pass this discipline by. Now in psychology, you would be considered odd to stick with operant conditioning. This has been dealt with, I mean, this is a very, this has been really put in a very minor place. It was an overrated asset in the 40s and 50s, but then came, for instance, Bandura with a completely different approach, namely social learning. This is a different thing from operant conditioning. And we have modern learning theories that are really far away from operant conditioning. Okay, this was just a footnote. So here we have our well-trained artificial intelligence. Now, this is not a socialized person. It's a well-trained animal, let's say, or animal equivalent. And I would really say that there's an interesting analogy. I mean, what we call an artificially intelligent system, which surprises us by its godlike or demonic powers of calculation, is simply a pigeon writ large. I mean, it's a pigeon with incredible capacity to work on information and to do things, but it's a pigeon nonetheless. It's not socialized into a human world as persons are socialized. So, with all these limitations in place, we have here the machine in which the AI system rules supreme, but this is coupled in various ways to all kinds of other systems and to all kinds of other practices. For instance, here, let's say here are kids doing their TikTok dances, which are recorded and then spread all over the globe and so on. That's one of the reasons why I call it China Room. Actually, I have some other homey examples that would show that whatever this box does here on the interface is then processed through other stages and changes and can change into completely different tasks. You can use one algorithm for sorting the functionaries of the Communist Party that have done best work in the last year, and you can use the same algorithm to sort out those citizens in quarters where they have protested the most against draconian anti-corona measures. The same algorithm would do it. He would do it in this way when wired that way, and he would produce a completely different kind of work when wired into other practices. This is the point that I want to illustrate with this, and the red lines here are the accountability bit, because after all, every transformative stage, every coupling, every step in this whole ensemble has its constructors. Some of them don't appear in the foreground, but some of them do. Like this is the software engineer or the trainer of the pigeon, for instance. This is, I don't know, some guy must have made this connection. This connection is attributable to this actor or agent, and so on. So, in principle, none of these things make themselves by themselves. They all have persons as trackable, in principle at least, trackable loci of responsibility. That's the point that I wanted to illustrate. Okay. Now, I think even though we began late, I should come to an end, which I will do quickly. The third distinction, namely power in AI as ideology. AI as ideology, but this is, I found this formulation of David Beer while telling the notion of the algorithm is part of a wider vocabulary. Same holds for an artificial intelligence, a vocabulary that we might see deployed to promote a certain rationality, a rationality based upon the virtues of calculation, competition, efficiency, objectivity, and the need to be strategic. Now, I mean, has the image or idea or narrative or metaphor of the algorithm any power? And I would say very much so, likewise for artificial intelligence. But how so? Well, by way of its framing, by how we frame these ideas or notions, images, narratives, and so on, by how a great many agents with very little communicative power and a few agents with tremendous communicative power shape and reinforce the relevant frames. Now, coming back again to an empirical view, what exactly does media discourse about algorithms and about artificial intelligence look like in Germany. You've already saw the word count, but now here's a bit more content. There's a study by Fischer and Puschmann, 2015, covering 15 years of media coverage. They find that public, quote, that public debate lacks diversity and has blind spots with regard to the public interest. An economic perspective has dominated the discourse with a generally very positive framing, while political and civil society actors are rarely mentioned. In all of the media reviewed, mainstream media publications, specialist blogs, websites, Twitter, an overwhelmingly positive tone toward the subject dominates. The opportunities discussed in the debate, again, show the dominance of the economic perspective, alongside selected opportunities for individuals, such as meeting personal needs more effectively or expanding human capabilities. Media coverage focuses primarily on economic advantages associated with algorithms and AI, such as economic progress and increases in efficiency. By contrast, overall societal opportunities, such as better distribution of scarce resources or fairer access to government services, are rarely mentioned. The situation is similar with regard to the field of applications for algorithmic systems. Here, everyday digital technologies such as virtual assistant systems, we've seen duplex here, or social media are discussed significantly more often than key areas relevant to the public welfare, such as medicine or education. Okay, we've seen here colleagues lecturing on education. Like you remember the smart classroom. It's not so widespread in public discourse, but I'm not going to comment on the smart classroom. I think it would be a good example of for the China room. So anyway, the bulk of recommendations aim at increasing digital literacy or skills among users and the population more generally, while specific approaches for effective oversight, control, and regulation are mentioned much less frequently. Now, this all ties in neatly with this theoretical remark. By the way, the AI as ideology, this is what I meant to express when I used the word transfiguration in the title of my talk, and not only transformation, because to transfigure something is to give it a glorifying change in form or appearance, a glorifying change. Now, coming to an end, there's an agenda for humanities for us, namely critical scrutiny of AI as ideology would have to explain the prominence of its evocative appeal and examine the way that algorithms are part of broader rationalities, broader programs of social change and development. I can't do this here now, but I once did a seminar on the idea of progress, and I mean, it's not that les grands récits are over, just the opposite. I mean, there are big narratives of progress, and there's one term that is really catching 80% of it, of today's ideas of progress, and it's smart, everything becoming smart. Smartness is the new stand-in for progress with things digital. Also, a part of our agenda would have to be that we reveal the type of trust placed in systems that are labeled algorithmic. For instance, the idea that these are neutral and trustworthy systems working way beyond human capacity. And we from the humanities should investigate who stands to gain what and who to lose what by a given extant distribution of such trust. Okay, I'm really at the end now. Back to where we started. Power. Oh, okay, here are some more slides. I'm just rushing through because, I mean, inspired by Isabel's talk, I thought this is a world exposition. Everything we talk about must be found here, and I did find it in the Estonian pavilion. Now, they pride themselves with the idea of digital societies. This is a seamless society. This is a smart society. It's a successful path. It requires smart people with an entrepreneurial mindset. Here you have the economic angle. It's a revolution, and it's meant for everybody because everybody can be digital and smart. That's the message. Even here I found a smart police station, which I found quite intriguing. They didn't let me in though, but here, last slide. Again, this is sort of evocative language. Technology is ready, are we? Something is about to happen, we have to adapt, we must work hard to make that further leap, and so on. Okay, I'm not going into depth, just you get the aroma, right? Okay. So again, coming back to the theoretical cultural point of view, AI gains as ideology and as performance an immense power of normalization. It quickly can disrupt practices that have hitherto been normal and transform them into other practices which are then considered normal. I mean, using smartphones everywhere by everyone is a practice that is outrageous, but it has been normalized, culturally normalized within 10 years. I mean, okay. So just, this is, so it's played out basically here and a normalizing power. This is where I would continue this talk if I had more time, but fortunately I don't. So we end up with a little illustration. I was speaking of sovereignty in the beginning as the telos of the modern summum bonum of power as conducive to this modern summum bonum, which is individual sovereignty. Let's conclude with a delightful glimpse of the smart ambient living of your dreams. Marvel at artificial intelligence in the Internet of Things. Coming soon. This is just going to take 2 minutes, so this is a future film. Okay, that was it. Thanks for the attention.